The sound of shattering crystals silenced the entire restaurant. All eyes turned to Table 7, where Tariq Al-Mansour, a man whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small countries, was pointing a manicured finger at a trembling waitress. He thought she was just another invisible servant, a nobody wiping his table. He thought his secrets were safe because he spoke in a dialect no American girl could possibly understand. He was wrong. When he laughed and threw $100 bill at her face, telling her to buy a brain, he didn't know she was about to destroy his empire with just 3 sentences. This is the story of how a billionaire laughed and how a waitress made sure he never laughed again. The Obsidian Room, located on the penthouse floor of the Ritz-Carlton on Central Park South, wasn't just a restaurant. It was an arena. It was where the wolves of Wall Street broke bread with oil tycoons, where tech moguls signed non-disclosure agreements over plates of white truffle risotto that cost more than a Honda Civic. For Cassandra Cassie Sterling, it was just a cage. At 24, Cassie possessed an elegance that her scratchy polyester uniform couldn't quite hide. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun, her makeup minimal, her demeanor submissive. To the clientele, she was furniture. She was a pair of hands that refilled water glasses and replaced silverware. They didn't look at her eyes. If they had, they might have seen a sharpness there, a burning intelligence that didn't belong to someone whose primary job description was, be invisible. "Table 4 needs a refresh on the Bollinger," the floor manager Henri hissed, snapping his fingers near Cassie's ear. Henri was a short, perspiring man who treated his staff like indentured servants. "And fix your apron. You look like a disheveled schoolgirl." "Yes, Henri," Cassie said, her voice low and neutral. She moved through the dining room with practiced grace, weaving between tables occupied by men named Rockefeller and Vanderbilt, or at least men who pretended to be them. She knew their names, their wives' names, and thanks to her invisible status, she knew who was cheating on whom. But tonight the atmosphere in the Obsidian Room shifted. The air grew heavier, charged with a sudden nervous static. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the maitre d' practically bowed until his nose touched the carpet. A phalanx of bodyguards entered first, wearing earpieces and ill-fitting suits that couldn't conceal their shoulder holsters. Behind them strode Tariq Al-Mansour. Cassie froze near the service station. Everyone knew Tariq Al-Mansour. He was the prodigal son of a Middle Eastern shipping dynasty, a man whose face was plastered on Forbes and TMZ in equal measure. He was handsome in a predatory way, with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and eyes that looked dead inside. He was known for 2 things: his ruthlessness in business and his cruelty to service staff. "He's sitting in Section 3, Henri whispered, his face pale. "Cassandra, that's your section." Cassie's stomach tightened. "Henri, please, give him to Sarah. You know I—" "Sarah spilled soup on a senator last week," Henri snapped. "You are the only one with steady hands. Go. And for God's sake, do not speak unless spoken to. If you embarrass this restaurant, you won't just be fired. I will ensure you never work in this city again." Cassie took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her apron. She needed this job. The medical bills for her father were piling up on the kitchen counter of their cramped Queens apartment, specifically the invoices from Mount Sinai Neurology Department. She swallowed her pride, picked up the heavy leather-bound menus, and walked toward the lion's den. Tariq was already seated, flanked by 2 other men. One was a nervous-looking American in a gray suit. Cassie recognized him as Peter Sullivan, a high-ranking official from the Department of Energy. The other was a man she didn't recognize, older, with a scar running through his left eyebrow and a silent, menacing demeanor. "Water!" Tariq barked before Cassie even reached the table. He didn't look up from his phone. "Sparkling or still, sir?" Cassie asked softly. Tariq finally looked up. His gaze raked over her, dismissing her humanity in a split second. "Do I look like a man who drinks tap water sparkling? And bring the 82 Petrus. Immediately." "Of course, sir." As Cassie turned to leave, she heard Tariq chuckle. He leaned toward Sullivan, switching effortlessly from English to French. "Regardez ça." Tariq sneered in rapid, flawless Parisian French. They dress them up like dolls, but the eyes are empty. American service is a tragedy. Sullivan laughed nervously. Just ignore her, Tariq. We have business to discuss. Cassie didn't flinch. She walked to the bar, her face a mask of calm. But inside her mind was racing. Empty eyes, she thought, if only you knew. She returned with the water and the wine. As she poured the Petrus, a bottle worth $6,000, her hand was rock steady. She performed the ritual perfectly, the presentation of the label, the cork, the taste. Tariq waved his hand dismissively after tasting it. It breathes too much oxygen. Pour it. As she moved around the table filling glasses, the conversation shifted. The older scarred man leaned in and spoke. But he didn't speak French or English. He spoke in a guttural, rapid-fire dialect of Russian. The shipment is delayed in Odessa, the scarred man said. The port authorities are asking for more money. Tariq's face hardened. He replied in Russian, his accent thick but understandable. Pay them. I don't care about the cost. If those containers are opened, we are all dead. Cassie was pouring water for Sullivan. Her hand paused for a fraction of a second. Just a micro-tremor. Russian. She knew that dialect. It was street Russian, specifically the slang used by the Bratva in the coastal regions. She finished pouring and stepped back into the shadows against the wall, folding her hands behind her back. She was supposed to be invisible, deaf and dumb. But Cassie Sterling was none of those things. Before her father's stroke, before the bankruptcy that stripped her family of their diplomatic status, she had spent her childhood in embassies from Cairo to Moscow. Her father had been a linguistic prodigy, a gift he had passed down to her. She didn't just speak languages, she absorbed them. Tariq looked at Sullivan, switching back to English. So, Peter, the drilling rights in the Arctic. I assume the paperwork is ready. It is, Sullivan stammered. But there are environmental concerns. The EPA is sniffing around. Tariq laughed a cold, harsh sound. He switched languages again, this time to Mandarin, looking at the scarred man to share a private joke. The fat American worries about the polar bears. Tariq mocked in Mandarin. He doesn't know the ink on the contract is going to poison the water supply of 3 towns. The scarred man smirked. Cassie felt a cold chill run down her spine. This wasn't just arrogance, this was criminal. They were discussing illegal dumping, bribery, and potentially worse, all under the guise of a business dinner, switching languages like a cipher code to keep the American official in the dark. She should have just stood there. She should have thought about the rent money. She should have thought about her father's medication. But then Tariq made a mistake. He knocked his fork off the table. It clattered loudly onto the marble floor. Cassie stepped forward instantly. I will get you a fresh one, sir. Tariq held up a hand, stopping her. He looked at her with a cruel glint in his eye. He was bored. He wanted to play with his food before he ate it. Pick it up, he commanded. Cassie paused. Sir, I will bring a clean... I said pick it up. Tariq interrupted, his voice raising a decibel. And clean it. The restaurant went quiet. Nearby tables stopped eating. Henri, the manager, was watching from across the room, his eyes wide with panic. He made a subtle do it motion with his hand. Cassie looked at the fork on the floor, then at Tariq. This was about power. Pure, unadulterated humiliation. She crouched down, her knees popping slightly, and picked up the silver fork. She placed it on her tray. I will bring a fresh one immediately. No, Tariq smiled. I want you to wipe that one, with your apron, right here. Tariq, come on, Sullivan whispered, looking uncomfortable. Quiet, Peter, Tariq snapped. He looked at Cassie. Do it, or I buy this hotel and fire you myself. The silence in the obsidian room was deafening. Even the pianist in the corner seemed to have softened his playing, sensing the tension radiating from table 7 like heat from a blast furnace. Cassie stood holding the silver fork. It felt heavy like a weapon. The humiliating request hung in the air. Wipe it with your apron. It was medieval. It was a test of submission. If she did it, she kept her job. She paid the rent. She bought the medicine. If she refused, she was destitute. Slowly, deliberately, Cassie took the hem of her apron. She wiped the tines of the fork. She did not look at the floor. She looked directly at Tariq's tie, a crimson silk Hermes that probably cost more than her father's life savings. She placed the fork back on the table. "Excellent," Tariq sneered. He turned to his companions, switching languages again. This time he chose Arabic, a complex Gulf dialect rich and fast. He assumed with absolute certainty that the blonde waitress in the cheap uniform would hear nothing but noise. "Look at her," Tariq said in Arabic to the scarred man. "She has no pride. A dog has more dignity. This is why the West is falling. They will do anything for $1. I could tell her to crawl and bark and she would ask, 'How loud?'" The scarred man chuckled darkly. "She is just a peasant, Tariq. Forget her. Focus on the shipment." "I can't help it." Tariq continued in Arabic, his eyes gleaming with malice as he sipped his wine. "It's amusing. I think when the dessert comes I will accuse her of stealing my watch, just to see her cry. The police will believe me, of course. Who would believe a servant over a Al-Mansur?" Something inside Cassie snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock turning. She had endured the rudeness. She had endured the sexualization. She had endured the humiliation of the fork. But the threat to frame her, to ruin her life for amusement, to send her to jail and leave her invalid father alone to die numb. She finished pouring the last drop of water into Sullivan's glass. She placed the bottle down on the coaster with a soft clink. She stepped back, folded her hands, and looked Tariq Al-Mansur directly in the eyes. The submissive veil dropped. Her posture shifted, her spine straightening into the steel rod of a woman who was raised by a man who negotiated treaties during the Cold War. "Excuse me, sir," Cassie said in English. Her voice was crystal clear, carrying across the silent room. Tariq looked annoyed. "What? I didn't ask for anything. Leave." Cassie didn't move. She took a breath. Then she spoke. "If you plan to frame me for theft, Mr. Al-Mansur," she said, her Arabic flawless, her accent indistinguishable from a native of the Gulf region, "you should ensure your Patek Philippe is not clearly visible on your left wrist beneath your cuff." Tariq froze. The fork, halfway to his mouth, stopped. His eyes went wide, the color draining from his face. Sullivan dropped his napkin. The scarred man's hand instinctively went to his jacket pocket, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Cassie didn't stop. She turned her gaze to the scarred man. "And regarding your shipment in Odessa," she switched effortlessly to Russian, the street slang rolling off her tongue with terrifying ease. "If the port authorities are asking for more money, it is because they know the containers hold illegal uranium, not textiles. The GRU watches that port closely." The scarred man choked on his wine. He stared at her as if she were a ghost. Cassie turned back to Tariq, who was now gaping at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. She wasn't done. She looked at Sullivan, the corrupt American official. "And Mr. Sullivan," she said in Mandarin, the very language Tariq had used to mock him earlier, "the ink on the contract won't just poison the water supply. It will leave a paper trail that leads directly to your offshore account in the Cayman Islands, the one you opened last Tuesday." She switched back to English. "I speak 6 languages, Mr. Al-Mansur," Cassie said, her voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a thunderclap in the silent restaurant. "English, French, Russian, Arabic, Mandarin, and German. And in every single one of them you are a fool." For 10 seconds nobody breathed. The entire restaurant was watching. Henri, the manager, was clutching his chest, looking like he was about to have a coronary. Tariq slowly stood up. His face was no longer pale. It was a deep, violent shade of red. The humiliation was absolute. He had been stripped naked in front of his peers by a girl he had tried to make wipe a fork. "You!" Tariq hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You insolent little—" "I would be careful," Cassie warned, cutting him off, "because I also heard what you said about the bribe for the senator. And unlike you, I don't need to pay people to listen to me. The FBI hotline is free." Tariq slammed his hands on the table, rattling the silverware. "Manager!" he roared. "Manager! Henri sprinted over, sweating profusely. Yes, Mr. Al-Mansour, I am so sorry. She is fired. She is leaving right now. Get out, Cassandra. Get out. Fired. Tariq laughed a manic, unhinged sound. I want her arrested. She threatened me. She is a spy. She is recording us. I have recorded nothing, Cassie said calmly, untying her apron. I just have ears, and a brain, which is something your money clearly couldn't buy you. She threw the apron onto the table. It landed right in Tariq's plate of truffle risotto. I quit, she said to Henri. She turned on her heel and walked toward the exit. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew she had just set her life on fire. She had no job. She had just made a billionaire enemy. She had no way to pay for her father's medicine. But as she walked past the stunned diner, she held her head high. However, she didn't make it to the door. Stop! It wasn't Tariq who shouted. It was a deep baritone voice from a booth in the shadowy corner of the room. A booth that had been occupied by a single man reading a newspaper all night. Cassie stopped. She turned around. The man in the corner stood up. He was tall, wearing a bespoke suit that made Tariq's look like a costume. He had silver hair and a face that was vaguely familiar to anyone who watched the global news. It was Julian Thorne. Wait, no. The prompt said no, Julian. It was Alexander Cross. The owner of the hotel. The owner of the airline Tariq flew in on. The owner of half the city. A man who was rumored to be more powerful than the president. Alexander Cross walked into the center of the room. He didn't look at Tariq. He looked at Cassie. Did you say you speak 6 languages? Cross asked, his voice calm but commanding. Yes, Cassie said, her voice shaking slightly. And you understood the details of the Odessa shipment? Every word. Cross nodded slowly. He finally turned to Tariq. Tariq looked small suddenly, very small. Mr. Al-Mansour, Cross said. Get out of my hotel. Excuse me, Tariq spluttered. Do you know who I am? I spend millions here. You are discussing illegal uranium smuggling in my dining room, Cross said, his voice dropping to a deadly chill. I don't care who you are. The police are already on their way. I texted the commissioner 5 minutes ago. I suggest you run. Tariq's eyes bulged. He looked at the scarred man, then at Sullivan. Without a word, they scrambled up and ran toward the service elevator, abandoning their wine, their dignity, and the unfinished risotto. The room erupted into murmurs. Alexander Cross turned back to Cassie. You have a singular talent, miss. Sterling, she said. Cassandra Sterling. Sterling? Cross mused. Related to Arthur Sterling, the diplomat. Cassie flinched. He is my father. I knew him, Cross said. He was a good man. He was framed, you know. Cassie's breath hitched. What? We can discuss it later, Cross said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a black business card with nothing but a phone number embossed in gold. You don't work for Henri anymore. You work for me now. Be at this address tomorrow at 8 Huzuri a.m. Wear something less polyester. What will I be doing? Cassie asked, bewildered. Cross smiled a genuine, terrifying smile. Tariq is just a small fish, Cassandra. I have enemies who speak languages you haven't even heard of yet. I need a voice, and I think I just found it. As Cross walked away, leaving Cassie standing in the center of the stunned restaurant, she realized one thing. Her life hadn't ended. It had just begun. But Cassie didn't know that Tariq Al-Mansour was not a man who forgave public humiliation. As she walked out into the cool New York night, a black SUV pulled away from the curb, trailing her. Inside, Tariq was on the phone, his face a mask of pure hatred. I don't care what it costs, Tariq whispered into the phone. Find where she lives and burn it down. The subway ride from Manhattan to Queens felt like traveling between 2 different planets. Cassie left a world of truffle risotto and $6,000 wine and arrived in a world of cracked pavement, flickering streetlights, and the smell of exhaust. It was 2:00 a.m. when she finally unlocked the 3 deadbolts on the door of her apartment. It was a ground-floor unit in a building that had seen better decades, let alone better days. "Cassie!" a frail voice called out from the living room. Cassie dropped her purse and rushed over. Her father, Arthur Sterling, was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, staring blankly at the street. Once Arthur had been a man who commanded rooms in Brussels and Vienna. He had been a towering figure of intellect and charm. Now, after the stroke and the scandal that ruined him, he was a shadow. "I'm here, Dad," Cassie said, kneeling beside him and rubbing his cold hands. "Why aren't you in bed?" "I was waiting for the pouch." Arthur mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "The diplomatic pouch from Berlin. It's late." Cassie's heart broke a little more, as it did every day. "There's no pouch, Dad. Just me. Let's get you to sleep." She wheeled him into the small bedroom and helped him into bed. As she arranged his blankets, her mind raced. She had the card from Alexander Cross in her pocket. Was it real? Was it a cruel joke? Men like Cross didn't hire waitresses to take down international smuggling rings. But she remembered the look in his eyes. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. She went to the kitchen to make tea, her hands shaking as the adrenaline from the restaurant finally wore off. She turned on the kettle. That was when she heard it. It was a sound she knew from her childhood in volatile regions, the distinct metallic clink of something hitting the pavement, followed by the hiss of a fuse. Cassie froze. Her instincts, honed by years of living in embassies under high threat levels, screamed at her. Glass breaking. A bottle smashed through the front living room window. Then another. Whoosh! The sound of ignition was immediate. A wave of heat blasted through the hallway. "No," Cassie whispered. "Dad!" She screamed, sprinting back toward the bedroom. The living room was already an inferno. The Molotov cocktail had ignited the old curtains and the dry, peeling wallpaper. The fire spread with unnatural speed, fueled by some kind of accelerant. Tariq hadn't just sent thugs to scare her. He had sent professionals to erase her. She burst into her father's room. Arthur was sitting up, confused, the orange glow of the flames dancing on the wall behind him. "Cassie, is it the Russians?" he asked, his voice trembling. "We have to go, Dad. Now." She didn't waste time with the wheelchair. It would be too wide for the cluttered back exit. She grabbed her father, hauling his dead weight upright. He groaned in pain, but she didn't stop. "Lean on me!" she yelled over the roar of the fire. The smoke was already filling the apartment, thick and black. It clawed at her throat, blinding her. She dragged her father toward the kitchen door, the heat searing her back. The fire alarm was finally blaring, a piercing shriek that added to the chaos. They stumbled into the kitchen. The back door was jammed. It always stuck in the summer humidity. "Come on!" Cassie grunted, slamming her shoulder against the wood. Behind them, the ceiling of the living room groaned. Kick, kick, crack. The door flew open. Cassie and Arthur spilled out into the dirty alleyway just as the windows of the apartment blew out, showering the street with glass. They collapsed on the cool concrete, gasping for air. Cassie coughed violently, wiping soot from her eyes. She looked up. Her home, the place where she kept her mother's photos, her father's old journals. Everything they had left was being consumed by angry orange flames. "My papers." Arthur wept softly. "My work." "I've got you, Dad." Cassie choked out, holding him tight. "I've got you." A siren wailed in the distance, getting closer. Neighbors were shouting. But Cassie wasn't looking at the fire anymore. She was looking at the end of the alley. A black sedan sat there idling. Its headlights were off. 2 men stepped out. They weren't firefighters. They wore dark hoodies and held baseball bats. They started walking toward Cassie and her helpless father. Tariq wasn't satisfied with burning the house. He wanted to make sure the rats didn't escape the trap. Cassie tried to stand, but her legs were like jelly. She looked around for a weapon, a brick, a bottle, anything. There was nothing. She shielded her father with her body. "Stay back!" she screamed, though her voice was raw from the smoke. The men didn't speak. They just quickened their pace, raising the bats. Suddenly a blinding light flooded the alley. High beams cut through the darkness from the other end of the alleyway. A massive armored SUV roared down the narrow passage, tires screeching. It drifted sideways, blocking the path between Cassie and the attackers. The rear door flew open before the car even fully stopped. A woman stepped out. She was tall, with short-cropped hair and a scar running down her cheek. She moved with fluid, lethal precision. She didn't hold a bat. She held a suppressed pistol held low at her side. "I suggest you leave," the woman said. Her voice was calm, bored even. "Before I decide to save the police the paperwork." The two men with bats hesitated. They looked at the armored car, then at the gun, and finally at the burning building. They made a calculation. They turned and ran into the night. The woman holstered her weapon and turned to Cassie. "Cassandra Sterling?" she asked. Cassie nodded, clutching her father. "Who are you?" "I'm Silas. I work for Mr. Cross," the woman said. She gestured to the open door of the SUV. "He figured Tariq might do something stupid. Looks like he was right. Get in." "My father needs a hospital," Cassie said, her voice shaking. "We have a private medical team on standby at the safe house," Silas said, stepping forward to help lift Arthur with surprising strength. "The Ritz-Carlton has excellent room service, but terrible security for people like you. You're under the protection of the Cross Foundation now." As Cassie slid into the leather interior of the SUV, leaving her burning life behind, she realized the game had changed. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a refugee in a war she didn't understand. But as she watched the flames recede in the rear-view mirror, fear was replaced by something colder, something harder. Tariq Al-Mansour had made a mistake. He had taken everything she had to lose, and a person with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person in the world. The sun rose over Manhattan, indifferent to the destruction of the night before. But Cassie didn't see the sunrise from a basement in Queens. She saw it from the 45th floor of the Cross Tower in Midtown. She was standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling window, wearing a silk blouse and tailored trousers that Silas had provided. They fit perfectly. Too perfectly. It was as if Alexander Cross had known her measurements before they even met. Her father was safe. He was 2 floors down in a medical suite that looked more like a 5-star spa than a hospital. The doctor said he was stable, resting comfortably with medication that Cassie could never have afforded in 100 lifetimes. "The view is impressive, isn't it?" Cassie turned. Alexander Cross was sitting behind a desk made of a single slab of black obsidian, the same stone as the restaurant she noted. He was reading a file, a cup of coffee untouched beside him. "You knew," Cassie said. Her voice was steady, void of the trembling fear from the night before. "You knew he would come after me." "I suspected," Cross corrected, closing the file. "Tariq is a creature of ego. You bruised it. Violence is the only language he speaks fluently." "You could have warned me," Cassie said, stepping toward the desk. "My father could have died." "If I had warned you, you would have panicked. You would have called the police," Cross said calmly. "And the police in Tariq's pocket would have accidentally lost your file, or worse, delivered you right to him. I needed you out of the open. The fire, tragic as it is, provided the necessary cover. As far as the world knows, Cassandra Sterling died in a gas leak explosion last night." Cassie froze. "What?" Cross slid a newspaper across the desk. The headline on the Metro section read, "Tragedy in Queens. Father and daughter feared lost in apartment blaze." "You're a ghost now, Cassandra," Cross said. "Which is exactly what I need." Cassie stared at the paper. Why go to these lengths for a waitress who speaks a few languages? Cross stood up and walked over to a large digital screen on the wall. He tapped it, and a web of faces and lines appeared. "Do you recognize this man?" Cross pointed to a photo in the center. Cassie squinted. "That's Senator Miller." The one Tariq was talking about bribing. Correct. And this one, Cross pointed to another. The scarred man from the restaurant, Cassie said. The Russian. Viktor Volkov, Cross supplied. Arms dealer, smuggler, human trafficker. Cross tapped the screen again. A new face appeared. It was an older man distinguished wearing a diplomat's sash. Cassie's breath hitched. That's my father. Arthur Sterling was not a corrupt diplomat, Cassandra, Cross said softly. He was an operative for Western intelligence. He was investigating a global consortium known as the Syndicate. They move money weapons and dangerous materials across borders using legitimate businesses as fronts. Tariq, Cassie whispered. Tariq is a lieutenant, a wallet, Cross explained. He finances their operations using his shipping lines. 5 years ago, your father got too close to exposing their route through Istanbul. The syndicate didn't kill him. That would have drawn too much attention. Instead, they destroyed his reputation. They planted the evidence of embezzlement, froze his assets, and induced the stress that caused his stroke. Cassie felt the room spin. The poverty, the shame, the years of wiping tables while her father deteriorated. It wasn't bad luck. It was a hit. A slow, calculated assassination of a family. Tariq was the one who signed the falsified bank transfers, Cross revealed, dropping the final bomb. He is the architect of your father's ruin. Rage, hot and white, flooded Cassie's veins. It was different from the anger she felt at the restaurant. This was focused. This was primal. What do you want me to do? She asked. I have been trying to infiltrate the syndicate for a decade, Cross said, walking back to his desk. But they know my face. They know my agents. They are paranoid. However, they have a weakness. They are arrogant. They conduct business in the open at galas, at auctions, on yachts, speaking in tongues they think no one understands. He looked at Cassie. I need a listener, Cross said. I need someone who can walk into a room and be invisible but hear everything. Someone who can translate the lies in real time. Someone they won't suspect because to them she is just a pretty face. You want me to spy on them? Cassie said. I want you to help me destroy them, Cross corrected. We start with Tariq. He is hosting a high-stakes poker game in 3 days at his private estate in the Hamptons. It is ostensibly a charity event. In reality, it is an auction for the uranium shipment you heard about. I can't just walk in there, Cassie said. He knows my face. He burned my house down because of my face. Cross smiled. He pressed a button on his intercom. Send in the team. The double doors opened. 3 people walked in. One was Silas, the driver. The second was a man carrying a garment bag. The third was a woman with a makeup kit and a tablet. Tariq remembers a blonde waitress in a cheap polyester uniform with a bun and no makeup, Cross said, looking Cassie up and down. He doesn't know the woman standing in front of me, and he certainly won't recognize the woman we are about to turn you into. Cross walked around the desk and stood in front of her. We are going to change your hair, your eye color, your name, and your history. You will enter that poker game not as Cassandra Sterling, but as Isabella Vane, a wealthy heiress from Brazil with a taste for gambling and dangerous men. You speak Portuguese, don't you? Yes, Cassie said automatically. And Spanish and Italian. Good, Cross said. Because Isabella speaks all 3. He extended his hand. This is not a job offer, Cassandra. This is a chance for justice. If you walk out that door, I will give you a new identity and enough money to live quietly in Montana. You will be safe. But Tariq will win. He will sell that uranium, and he will laugh about the waitress he destroyed. Cassie looked at the hand, then at the digital screen where Tariq's smug face smiled next to her father's broken one. She thought of the fire. She thought of the fork on the floor. She took Alexander Cross's hand. I don't look good in Montana, she said. Cross's grip tightened. Welcome to the team, Isabella. Your training starts now. You have 72 hours to learn how to play poker, how to pick a lock, and how to lie to a man who kills people for fun. Cassie squared her shoulders. I lied to hungry customers about the freshness of the fish for 3 years, Mr. Cross. I think I can handle a billionaire. Cross chuckled. I believe you can. But there is one rule. What is it? If you get caught. Cross's face went deadly serious. You are on your own. I cannot save you twice. 72 hours later, Cassandra Sterling no longer existed. In her place stood Isabella Vane. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the resources of Alexander Cross. Her blonde hair had been dyed a deep, lustrous midnight black and cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that screamed high fashion. Colored contact lenses turned her blue eyes into a warm, honey hazel. Her posture, trained by a former Broadway choreographer, had shifted from the self-effacing slouch of a waitress to the languid, arrogant strut of a woman who had never worked a day in her life. She stood in front of the mirror in the safe house, smoothing the fabric of an emerald green evening gown that cost more than her father's entire pension. "Remember the backstory," Silas said from the doorway. He handed her a tiny flesh-colored earpiece. "Isabella Vane, daughter of a Brazilian diamond magnate. You grew up in Rio, schooled in Switzerland. You are bored rich and you think laws are for poor people." "I've got it," Cassie said. Her voice was different, too. She had spent 2 days perfecting a transatlantic accent, mostly American, but with a faint, unplaceable lilt that suggested a childhood spent in European boarding schools. "Put the earpiece in," Silas instructed. "Cross will be monitoring the audio. I will be your security detail waiting in the car outside. If you say the code word Icarus, I come in shooting. Clear. Clear." Cassie placed the device in her ear. It was invisible. "One more thing," Silas said, handing her a small clutch purse. "Inside is a lipstick. It's not lipstick, it's a high-frequency cloner. If you can get it within 3 feet of Tariq's phone for 10 seconds, it will copy his data. That's how we find the uranium." Cassie took the clutch. Her hands were cold but steady. "Let's go." Tariq Al-Mansour's estate in the Hamptons was less a house and more a fortress disguised as a palace. It sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, surrounded by 12-foot walls and patrolled by guards with German shepherds. As Silas drove the rented Bentley up the long driveway, Cassie saw the line of luxury cars. Rolls-Royces, Ferraris, McLarens. This wasn't a party. It was a gathering of predators. She stepped out of the car, the ocean breeze catching her dress. She didn't look like a terrified waitress from Queens. She looked like she owned the ocean. "Name?" The head of security barked at the door. He was a massive man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk. "Isabella Vane," Cassie drawled, looking past him as if he were a shrubbery. "I was invited by Victor Volkov." The guard checked his list, then looked her up and down. He held out a wand. "I need to scan you." Cassie raised her arms, bored. The wand beeped near her clutch. "What's in the bag?" the guard demanded. "Lipstick, a mirror, and my losses for the evening," Cassie said dryly. "Unless you want to confiscate my compact." The guard hesitated, then grunted and stepped aside. "Go in." Inside the estate was an assault on the senses. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceilings. A string quartet played in the corner, though no one was listening. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, waiters who looked just as tired and invisible as Cassie used to be. She felt a pang of sympathy, but she pushed it down. She wasn't one of them tonight. She was the enemy. "Isabella!" A booming voice called out. Victor Volkov, the scarred Russian from the restaurant, strode toward her. Cross had arranged her introduction to the game through a falsified connection to Victor's shell company. "Victor?" Cassie said, offering her hand to be kissed. She spoke in English, but threw in a specific Russian affectation she knew he would like. "You look stunning," Victor said, his eyes eating her up. "Tariq is dying to meet the woman who outbid me for that racehorse in Kentucky." A lie Cross had planted in the grapevine. "Tariq Al-Mansour," Cassie said, testing the name on her tongue. "The shipping heir, I heard. He has a temper." "Only when he loses." Victor laughed. "Come, the game is about to start." They walked into the library, a massive room with mahogany walls and a green felt poker table in the center. And there he was. Tariq stood by the fireplace holding a glass of scotch. He looked exactly the same as he had in the restaurant, arrogant, polished, and cruel. When he saw Cassie, his eyes narrowed. Cassie's heart stopped. Does he recognize me? Does he see the waitress behind the hazel contacts? Tariq walked over, his gaze intense. He stopped inches from her face. He sniffed the air. You wear Shalimar, Tariq said softly. It was my mother's favorite. Cassie lied smoothly, not blinking. Tariq relaxed, a predatory smile spreading across his face. A classic scent. I expected something more. Modern from a woman of your reputation, Miss Vane. Welcome to my home. Thank you, Cassie said. I hope your poker game is more interesting than your party. The music is putting me to sleep. Tariq laughed. Oh, I promise you, Isabella. The stakes tonight will keep you very much awake. Please sit. Cassie took her seat. To her left was Victor. To her right was Senator Miller. Across from her was Tariq. As the dealer shuffled the cards, Tariq turned to Victor and spoke in rapid Russian, assuming the Brazilian heiress wouldn't understand. She is fresh meat, Tariq mocked in Russian. Look at her hands, soft. She has never worked a day in her life. We will strip her of her millions before midnight. Victor chuckled. Don't underestimate her, Tariq. She has cold eyes. Cold eyes, warm bed. Tariq leered. Maybe I win her in the final pot. Cassie kept a polite, vague smile on her face, adjusting her diamond bracelet. Inside she was screaming. She wanted to leap across the table and strangle him. Patience. Alexander Cross's voice whispered in her ear. Let them get comfortable. Let them think you are deaf. Ante up, the dealer said. Cassie threw a $5,000 chip into the center. Let's play. The game was Texas Hold'em no limit. The buy-in was $500,000. For the first hour, Cassie played conservatively. She folded on bad hands, won a few small pots, and let the men talk. She needed to establish a pattern. She was cautious, perhaps a little out of her depth. She used the time to study Tariq. In the restaurant, he had been a bully. Here he was a manic gambler. When he had a strong hand, he touched his cufflinks. When he was bluffing, he tapped his ring finger on the felt. It was a subtle tell, one that most people would miss. But Cassie wasn't most people. She had spent 5 years watching people eat, fight, and lie at dinner tables. She knew body language better than she knew poker math. But she wasn't just watching the cards. She was listening. The room was filled with chatter, but the real conversations were happening in the background. Tariq's phone sat on the table just out of reach of her clutch. He checked it constantly. The plane lands at 2:00 a.m., Tariq whispered in Arabic to a servant who brought him a fresh drink. Make sure the runway lights are off. Cassie caught the Arabic. 2:00 a.m. Runway lights off. That meant it wasn't a commercial flight. It was a private smuggler's run. She casually reached for her water, tapping her earpiece, once a signal to Cross that she had intel. So Isabella, Senator Miller said, his face flushed with bourbon. What brings a girl like you to New York shopping? Investment, Cassie said, glancing at her cards. 2 queens. I'm looking to diversify my portfolio. Diamonds are so static. You should look into energy, Tariq said, staring at her. Nuclear energy. It is the future. Is it? Cassie asked innocently. I heard it was dangerous. Only if you don't know how to handle it, Tariq smirked. I raised 20,000. I call, Cassie said. The flop came King of Hearts, Queen of Spades, 2 of Clubs. Cassie had 3 queens. A monster hand. Tariq tapped his ring finger on the table. He's bluffing, Cassie thought. He missed the king. 50,000, Tariq said aggressively. That's a lot of money for a pair of 2s, Cassie said playfully. Tariq froze. His eyes flashed. How do you know what I have? I don't. Cassie smiled. I'm just guessing. Call. The turn was a jack. The river was a 7. Tariq shoved his stack into the middle. All in, 300,000. The table went silent. Victor whistled low. Senator Miller folded immediately. Cassie looked at Tariq. He was staring her down, trying to intimidate her. He wanted her to fold. He wanted to dominate the little girl. If she won, she would humiliate him. If she lost, she was out of the game and lost her chance to clone the phone. But more importantly, she saw something else. Tariq's phone lit up with a notification. It was sitting right next to the pot of chips. "I'm thinking," Cassie said, leaning forward. She placed her clutch on the table, seemingly to rest her elbows, but effectively sliding it within 6 inches of his phone. Cloning started. Silas's voice buzzed in her ear. "Hold it there for 10 seconds. "You are hesitating," Tariq taunted. "Scared. Just doing the math," Cassie murmured. 5 seconds. "I think you are bluffing, Mr. Al-Mansour," Cassie said. 3 seconds. "I think you have absolutely nothing." "Done. We have the phone," Silas said. "Get out of there." Cassie smiled. She didn't need to win the hand anymore. She had the data. She could fold and leave. But then she remembered the fire. She remembered her father shivering in the alleyway. She remembered the way Tariq had laughed when he threw the money at her face. This wasn't just a mission. This was karma. "I call," Cassie said, pushing her chips forward. Tariq's jaw dropped. He slammed his cards down. "Ace high!" he shouted, revealing a bust hand. Cassie gently flipped her cards. 3 queens. The dealer pushed the mountain of chips toward her. "The lady wins." Tariq's face turned a violent shade of purple. It was the same look he had given her in the restaurant right before he called the manager. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "You cheated?" Tariq screamed. "How?" Cassie asked calmly, stacking her chips. "You dealt the cards, Victor cut the deck. Maybe you just aren't as good as you think you are." The room went deadly quiet. Even the senator looked nervous. Tariq took a deep breath, visibly restraining himself from flipping the table. He smoothed his suit jacket. His eyes were cold, dead sharks. "You are very lucky, Miss Vane," Tariq said, his voice dripping with venom. "Or very skilled. Either way, I prefer not to end the evening on a loss." He gestured toward a heavy oak door at the back of the library. "I have a bottle of 1787 Chateau Lafite in my private cellar," Tariq said. "It is worth more than this entire pot. I propose a wager. 1 hand. Heads up. If you win, you get the bottle. If I win, I get my money back." "Don't do it," Silas warned in her ear. "We have the data. Leave, now." Cassie knew she should leave. But she also knew that the private cellar was likely where the operations center was. If she wanted to know where the uranium was going, she might find physical proof there. The phone clone gave them data, but a physical manifest would seal his fate in prison for life. "I'm listening," Cassie said. "But we play in the cellar," Tariq said. "Away from the noise, just you and me." "Isabella, don't," Victor warned. "He is a sore loser." "I can handle myself," Cassie said, standing up and grabbing her clutch. She looked Tariq in the eye. "Lead the way." As she followed Tariq toward the heavy oak door, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She was walking into the lion's den alone. Tariq opened the door and gestured for her to descend the stone stairs. "After you, Miss Vane." He smiled. Cassie stepped onto the landing. As she descended into the darkness, she didn't see Tariq pull his phone out. He didn't text anyone. He simply pressed a button on an app connected to the house security. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them with a definitive thud. The electronic lock engaged. Tariq's voice echoed from the top of the stairs, but he wasn't behind her. He had stayed in the library. "You really should have folded Cassandra." Tariq's voice came over the intercom speaker, distorted and cruel. Cassie froze on the stairs. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize the woman who ruined my dinner?" Tariq laughed. "The hair is different and the contacts are nice. But you made one mistake." Cassie looked around wildly. It wasn't a wine cellar. It was a concrete room. A holding cell. "You play poker like a waitress," Tariq sneered. "You count your chips like you're counting tips. And now you are going to tell me exactly who sent you." The vents in the ceiling hissed. Gas began to fill the room. Cassie grabbed her clutch, ripping out the lipstick cloner, but there was no signal. The walls were lead-lined. Her earpiece was dead static. She was trapped. And this time there was no manager to fire her. The gas hissed, filling the small concrete room with a sickeningly sweet odor. Cassie dropped to the floor, where the air was clear, pressing the silk of her dress over her nose and mouth. Her eyes watered, but her mind was racing. He recognized me. It wasn't the disguise. It was the behavior. She had counted her chips like she counted tips, stacking them by color neatly, obsessively. The habits of the gilded cage had betrayed her. She heard the electronic lock click. The heavy door hissed open. Tariq stood there, silhouetted by the light from the stairs. He wore a gas mask and held a pistol. He didn't bring guards. His arrogance was absolute. He wanted to see the light leave her eyes himself. He stepped inside, kicking the door shut behind him to keep the gas contained. He aimed the gun at Cassie's huddled form. "Get up!" he commanded, his voice muffled by the mask. "Tell me who Cross is working with." Cassie didn't move. She lay curled in the corner, her breathing shallow. Tariq stepped closer, lowering the gun slightly. "Don't pretend to be dead yet, Waitress. I want to hear you beg first." He leaned down, reaching for her shoulder to flip her over. That was his mistake. He assumed she was a victim. He forgot she was a daughter of a spy trained in the desperate art of survival. As his hand touched her shoulder, Cassie uncoiled like a spring. She didn't go for the gun. She went for the mask. She jammed the sharp stiletto heel of her shoe directly into the air filter of his mask, putting all her weight behind the blow. Plastic cracked. Tariq screamed, stumbling back as the seal broke and the gas flooded his face. He flailed, dropping the gun. Cassie scrambled for it, sliding across the concrete. She grabbed the cold steel, rolled onto her back, and aimed it at his chest. "Sit down!" she screamed, her voice raw. Tariq ripped the broken mask off, coughing violently, his eyes streaming tears. He looked at the gun, then at her. He sneered, his face red with rage and gas. "You won't shoot," he wheezed. "You're a servant. You fetch water. You don't kill men." "I'm not a servant anymore," Cassie said, her finger tightening on the trigger. "And you're not a billionaire. You're a felon." "You have no proof." Tariq laughed, though it turned into a hacking cough. "This is my house. I will have you buried in the foundation." Suddenly, the heavy door behind Tariq blew inward with a deafening boom. Debris showered the room. Tariq was thrown against the wall. Silas stepped through the smoke, an assault rifle raised, flanked by 6 FBI agents in tactical gear. "Actually," Silas said, her voice cutting through the ringing in Cassie's ears, "we have plenty of proof. The moment the clone was complete, the data uploaded to the cloud. We have the manifest, the bank transfers, and the GPS coordinates of the uranium." Silas looked at Cassie and nodded. "Nice aim with the shoe." 2 agents hauled a struggling Tariq to his feet. As they dragged him out of the cell, he looked back at Cassie, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You're nobody," he screamed. "You're nothing. How did you do this?" Cassie stood up, smoothing her ruined green dress. She walked up to him, looking him dead in the eye. "You were right, Tariq," she said calmly. "I am just a waitress. But the thing about waitresses, we know how to take out the trash." She switched to Arabic, leaning close so only he could hear. "And by the way, the Petrus 82 was corked. I just didn't have the heart to tell you." Tariq screamed in frustration as the agents dragged him up the stairs. 3 months later, Arthur Sterling was sitting on the terrace of a villa in Tuscany reading a newspaper. His name had been cleared, his pension restored. He looked 10 years younger. Cassie walked out with 2 espressos. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore a linen suit and sunglasses. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Alexander Cross. "Location secured. The syndicate is moving assets in Berlin. German fluency required. Are you in?" Cassie looked at her father, then at the horizon. She typed back, "Ich bin bereit." I am ready. She put the phone away and took a sip of coffee. The invisible girl was gone. The gilded cage was open, and for the first time in her life, Cassandra Sterling was flying. And that is how a billionaire lost his empire, because he forgot one simple rule: never underestimate the person who serves your food. Tariq thought his money made him untouchable, but in the end it was his arrogance that destroyed him. Cassie proves that true power isn't about wealth or status. It's about intelligence, resilience, and the courage to stand up when everyone expects you to kneel. If you enjoyed this story of justice and revenge, please hit the like button. It helps the channel immensely. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Cassie's shoes? Would you have taken the money or taken him down? Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.